This is Miss Saffron, and I'm going to be going over the history of colonialism in India, as this has impacted India's development as a country today and kind of how their government runs their country. So first, India used to be a colony of England. In the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, England made it a goal to colonize all around the world to gain resources and territories because that means that you have more power. So in 1601, British troops arrive in South Asia. By 1830, most of India is under British control. And direct or indirect means that either direct control means that everything comes straight from London or the Queen, and then indirect means that there's some portions of South Asia where they got to rule themselves, kind of like the 13 colonies. Queen Victoria was crowned Empress of India in 1877, and the British rule was called the Raj, which is one of your vocabulary words. So here's a picture of Queen Victoria doing her duties in India. And then just kind of giving you a map of this area of the world focusing on the Indian Ocean, just where the British are going to settle. Now notice that there's other European nations that also have colonies, like you have the French that have a colony here in Vietnam and Madagascar. You have the Portuguese that are going to have a colony. Um, in Southeast Asia, even the United States, we're going to eventually take over territory too. So there's a lot of colonial building or colony building happening in this area of the world. And then if you go to this area of the world, there's a lot of monuments, palaces that were built. Queen Victoria's statue is all over her colonies, just as a reminder that this used to be a British colony. And you'll notice a lot of buildings that make it look like that you're in England and not really in India. So it's pretty interesting. So reasons for colonialization. Why would a European nation want all of these places that are on the other side of the world? Well, the number one reason is exporting raw materials. So things like spices, silks, could be corn, it could be different types of food. They want that raw material. And that raw material is then sent back to Europe and made into clothing, made into technology, made into transportation as a finished good. And then also they wanted to spread religion, specifically Christianity, and they wanted to civilize India. And what I mean by civilize is make them European, because the Europeans thought that they were superior over a lot of the other people around the world. So some impacts on India, the people of India had to pay taxes just like we did in the colonies. They also, one of those resources they had to pay taxes on was salt. So salt was collected along the coastlines in India, and people had to pay a tax on it, and they were not happy about that. So there's some protest movements that are going to come out in the early 19th century that are going to challenge that. There's going to be a lot of famines because the British really didn't rule the farmers and the landlords in India in a respectful and organized manner. And so that's going to cause like inequality with food. And then if you were an Indian or a South Asian, you were considered a second class citizen. So you didn't have the same rights. You were not treated the same as somebody that was there from England. A positive is that they helped to build infrastructure. So they helped improve roads, improve buildings, improve bridges, build a railroad network, start building cities. And like I said, a lot of this infrastructure is going to look very much so like how it would in England or Europe, but that is going to be a positive as far as the development of that country. And then unfortunately, they're also going to try to ban some of the cultural ideas or practices, including some of the things in Hinduism as well, were banned. So eventually, the Indians or the South Asians are going to get really tired of this British control, and they're going to start fighting back. So there is going to be a movement for Indian nationalism. So that's the idea of making your own country. And you can see in 1857, they have what is called the Great Mutiny, where British guns were greased with pork and beef to offend Muslims and Hindus. That's just going to upset the people of South Asia because that's disrespectful to their religion. So that's just one reason why they're going to want to fight back. In 1885, the Indian National Congress was formed in order to start the talks of independence. The British are going to try to divide the Hindus and the Muslim communities. And this is part of what happens in the Kashmir region once, you know, these areas do get their independence. Now the question is who controls what land. And then finally in 1906, the All India Muslim League is formed. Again, another group to try to gain independence. So Gandhi is going to play a big role in this. Gandhi was a man that studied law. He actually studied in London, studied in South Africa, kind of watched how people were treated in South Africa, and then really fought hard for your untouchable class. So even though he was born in a rich family, he chose to live like a poor citizen in order to understand what some of your lower caste system people were being treated like or how they lived. He was a lawyer trained in London. He originally supported the British, but then realized after living in South Africa, after seeing his homeland kind of be treated how they were treated, he started to change his way of thinking. Like I said, he lived in South Africa. He opposed the British in South Africa, how they treated people, and brought the movement back to India to try to create change. So he wore peasant clothes. So most of the time you're going to see Gandhi, kind of like the last slide, like kind of in a loincloth or in a robe, just to connect with your poor people. And then unfortunately, he was assassinated by one of his followers who was upset that he was trying to work for the Muslims, because you have to remember Hindus and Muslims do not get along in this region very well. And so unfortunately, one of his followers did assassinate him, even though, he was trying to get civil rights for all people. So Gandhi's philosophy, another vocabulary word, Sagaihara, is nonviolent non-cooperation. So this is that idea of you doing nonviolent protest, where you're protesting, you're marching, you're, you know, being disobedient in a civil way. It's providing a process for achieving goals peacefully, including strikes, boycotts, fasting, marches. And again, these are the same ideas that MLK and Nelson Mandela are going to use years later. So they repeat Gandhi's philosophy of this civil disobedience. So in 1947, the British, because they're busy dealing with World War II, they don't have time to worry about what's going on in South Asia. They grant this area their independence, and that is what we call the partition of South Asia. So that partition is going to happen in 1947, and this is where India is separated into West Pakistan and East Pakistan. And it's really complicated because on the map here, you can see where normal Pakistan is at. And you see a lot of arrows because people are moving around. People are trying to get on the right side. They don't want to be a minority in an area. They want to be with their like kind. So you have Muslims trying to rush over to West Pakistan or even East Pakistan, and Hindus are trying to rush into India. So that's going to cause a lot of conflict. That's going to cause a lot of clashing because people are trying to fight for territory. But what ends up happening is you can see that there's two Pakistans. You have a West Pakistan and an East Pakistan, and then India right in the middle. Well, East Pakistan no longer exists anymore. That is now the country of Bangladesh. And that is what that partition is. It's where the land is literally separated based on government ordinances or ruling. So the Kashmir region is still an area that is kind of up in the airs of who owns what. There's areas where India feels that they own it. There's areas that Pakistan feels that they own it. And then even parts of China are fighting over this area too. And this is it's kind of a toss up of who gets what. So the last couple slides going over the partition is just kind of the beginning of some of the conflict that is going on in India. This area is currently not unstable, but currently at a ceasefire as far as who controls this area. I would definitely go into the Kashmir conflict part of the module and make sure that you watch those videos to have a better understanding of what they're fighting. It is a territorial dispute as well as a religious dispute as well, and a migration dispute because it's questioning where people are going. So that all comes from India and South Asia, this whole region being colonized by the British. And again, when Europeans come in and they claim the land and then they leave and they don't set any laws, they don't teach these people how to rule themselves, it's kind of mass chaos. It's kind of where people start fighting to gain power. So that kind of leads into some of the current conflicts that this area is having today. So move on with the module. Make sure you look at the conflicts, and thanks for watching.